Hello and welcome to another episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of SAGA, the Small Agency Growth Alliance. And I am delighted to have with me one of my favorite panelists and someone who I haven't even asked if he has a prop or if he does what it is, Lee Nightmare, or more commonly known as Lee McKnight Jr.
Yes.
of RSWUS. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Hello. Thank you. I brought my spam with me.
Spam. Excellent.
I'm not going to eat it on camera. That would be off-putting, but it's not sponsored by spam, by the way. But
if spam would like to sponsor, we can work something out. Just give me a call.
We'll make spam burgers on the griddle live. This has become a cooking segment with Lee and Chip. So.
Hey, whatever it takes to build the audience, right?
We're not
Well, before we jump in, for anyone who has been living under a rock and hasn't seen you on the show before, why don't you give yourself a brief introduction?
Yeah, so Lee McKnight Jr., I'm the VP of Sales at RSWUS, based out of Cincinnati. And essentially, we are an outsourced business development firm solely working with advertising agencies, marketing services firms, and PR firms to help them drive and close more new business.
And so you've got some great perspective on business development and really all sorts of things in agency land. So I'm sure it'll be an interesting conversation that we have over the next 30 minutes or so. And as we usually do, we didn't script this too much. So, we'll kind of see where the conversation takes us. But I thought a good place to start would be, here in the US, we've got Black Friday coming up next Friday. Yeah. So there will be no episode of Small Agency Talk Show for all of you who are just sitting there waiting for it. You're not going to have us on YouTube next week. You'll have to just make do without. And I will be busy standing in line for a television set, trying to push people down. No, I will not be doing that because I don't
Cabbage Patch dolls.
God, now you're really dating us, Lee. Thanks. I appreciate that. As all of the young folk are out there typing, what is Cabbage Patch?
Yeah, just Google it.
Yeah. In any case, so I'm trying to figure out, Lee, for Black Friday, should I be out looking for a shotgun or a scalpel?
Indeed.
And I probably should provide some context to that, both so that I don't scare off the entire audience and also so that YouTube doesn't decide to just shut this channel off.
True.
But we were talking in the pre-show, and one of the things that strikes me is that agencies at all times, but particularly now, are really so focused on sort of the shotgun approach to business development. Let's try to get as many prospects that we can be talking to at once. And I think in reality, the more they focus with their scalpel on some specific opportunities, both with new people, but also growing your business organically, makes sense. So let's start there. I mean, first of all, why do agencies insist on this shotgun approach to business development?
Because it takes less effort and thought. That sounds mean, but
Are you saying agency people are lazy? Is that what you're saying, Lee? No. I mean, this may not be your best RSW business development tactic.
I'm not even necessarily, that might be some of it, but really, it's, I don't know if it's so much laziness as it is just maybe it is not putting the effort behind. And once you have that laid, you have all your parameters laid out, then what comes next, it doesn't, it can be a well-oiled machine where the numbers, it doesn't have to be, I'm going out to 3,000 companies. In fact, really shouldn't do that. The effort you put into that plan up front is going to pay off then ongoing. And we talked about it should not only should it not be 3,000, it shouldn't be 1,000. To I think the number you threw out, which I think it absolutely is. Listen, if you've got 150 tightly targeted companies that you are a fit for, and you can explain why, that's fine. You shouldn't get hung up on those numbers. And so one of the things why we were talking about this, I'd written a post earlier this week about digital fatigue, and it's not a new thing, but man, it's ever increasing. And it was a Forrester survey that was against 150 B2B marketers. And I think I'm looking at now, 80% of these folks recognize the pandemic increased digital reliance. We've seen it, and you and I think have even talked about it a bit. But the amount of just junk that we're getting specifically digitally through email is hurting all of us who are trying to get out there and prospect. And part of what I talk about in this blog post is just the fact that relying on any one channel, if you will, is to your detriment anyway, because you don't know where a prospect lives. So part of our process at RSW, and this is not a shameless plug, although here it comes, but it is that we've always been about, look, email, phone, social, where it makes sense. You have to have some kind of permission, and physical mail. It's always been those four things. Now, what's changed is our tech stack, which is, of course, critically important. And we're always looking at how can we make sure that this is up to snuff, if you will. And that's important for agencies too. But I think especially if you're a small to mid-sized firm, don't get scared like, okay, great. And if I look at this Forrester survey, you can see that there are some little plugs in there for a certain company that is all about, a platform, a SaaS platform that's going to tie into this physical mail campaign that you're doing. It doesn't even have to be that. If you have the wherewithal to do that in the budget, fantastic. But there are ways, and I talk about it in that post, that just incorporating, I'll send out letters to agency owners. It totally works. It's literally our letterhead. I personally sign it. And so many of them are like, I can't tell you the last time that happened. And it was refreshing. Why? Because you could tell it was literally signed by me. It was from a human being. It spoke to why they would even care and to their experience. And I think that agencies can similarly take those baby steps, have targeted focus, and don't just push the send button, because it's easy to send the email. You don't have to actually fear, you don't have to fear rejection per se, right? You can just shoot it out and let's see what sticks. It's not the right way to go.
Right. And you mentioned fear, and I think that's what drives a lot of this shotgun approach. It's not that they're lazy, and I joked about that earlier, but agency owners are some of the hardest working people that I know. But part of that is because they're not, scoping their projects correctly. They're not managing their projects correctly. And so they don't have the time that they should have to focus on business development. And at the same time, agency owners are often afraid, particularly in an environment like we're in right now, that business is going to dry up, that clients are going to leave, that there is going to be a recession and they're not going to be able to bring in, new business. Yeah. And so what does that say to them? It says, I just need to blast as much out there as I can, because, the more lines I have in the water, the more likely I am to be successful. Yeah. The problem with that is when fear overtakes you and you're not thinking thoughtfully about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do it. It means that you're more likely to attract bad fit clients that just perpetuate a problem perhaps that you already have, right? Because if you don't get good clients that you can develop good results for and do so efficiently and profitably and all that kind of stuff, then you still won't have time to focus on business development, and you'll still have a team that feels overwhelmed. So get that scalpel out and really start thinking about, how do you focus your efforts in the best possible way? How can you use resources, whether it's an outsourced firm like RSW or some of your internal resources that you have, in order to be more efficient in targeting those 50, 100, 150 targets, right? There's no reason to be out there blasting away at huge numbers of prospects. You're not likely to be successful doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Another piece of that, which is interesting, and I've had some conversations over the last couple of months as well. And this is self-serving on my point. It's not meant to be, but the hires, and we know how tough it is to hire a new business director at an agency. But as of late, one of the things about those blasts and the fear part that you mentioned, but also it's a little bit insidious is too strong a word, but you have these new business directors who've been hired who are not cutting it. They're getting a little desperate. And to be fair, a lot of times agencies don't give them the tools or the training they might need or what have you. So it can be a two-way street on where things might go wrong sometimes. But, it's easy to blast those emails out. And then you can say, well, look at the numbers and look what I've done here. I mean, I've reached out to, it's like, well, but you haven't really. I mean, you've written some kind of an email and pressed one button, what have you, done a little setup, but you didn't reach out to those 3,000 people per se. And so it's easy for them to come back to the agency principal and say, well, I mean, I'm trying here. And, it's tough because, to your earlier point, principals, you're wearing a lot of hats in these small and mid-sized firms, of course. And you're putting a certain level of trust factor that I can't shadow this person all day, and you shouldn't at all. But they can, bring those numbers back to that principal and say, I mean, look, it's tough out there. And it is tough out there.
It is, yeah. But you don't make it any easier on yourself if you're just, spamming people. Yeah. And I do think that part of the problem here is that people do want to, they want to be able to show their boss
Yeah.
or their team members or someone that they are doing something, but they also want to feel like they're doing something. So whether it's the business development director or the
Really.
owner, just feeling it like you're doing something to address it is often valuable. And so therefore you're not really thinking about what you're doing as long as you're doing something. And I think this is also what leads to the obsession that so many in the agency world have with RFPs, which I will continue to say on this show and anywhere else over and over again. RFPs for most agencies are a bad idea. They're not a place that you should be investing time, money, resources, brain power, any of that kind of stuff, because your odds of success are extremely low in most cases, in most industries. And so you are better off trying to win other kinds of business that you can do more reliably. And frankly, where you have a better sense what you're actually getting, because the problem when you're doing some of these blasts to lots of people or an RFP response process is you don't necessarily always have the best information, because your goal is simply to get a contract across the goal line.
Right.
And as soon as you start focusing on, I just want to win the business, and you lose sight of, is this a good fit? Is this kind of work we can do well? That's where you start really taking your whole business off track. And it's not just that you're not hitting your new business development targets or your new business targets at that point. You start missing other targets, and you start to be really miserable in the business that you're building.
Yeah, you do. And I love that, because, where that attitude also takes agencies is just at the initial, at top of the funnel, breaking through, getting those first couple of meetings. And with that attitude, I've seen it. I mean, I think what happens is, this meeting needs to happen and we need to close this business quickly. And you probably do, maybe you do need to, and that's fine, but that's not how it typically happens, right? And so then you go in with a mindset into like a first meeting or a second meeting, if it's not a referral, especially. And you might be thinking, all right, well, what's here? And a lot of times there's quite a bit there. They're just, again, we go back to the traditional sales axioms from time immemorial. Right? It's like, this is a process. It's going to take multiple touches. And just because they're not ready right now doesn't mean this isn't a potentially fantastic opportunity. It may be garbage, but I can't tell you how many, times we've had to recalibrate some of our own agency clients to make sure they understand that, look, we're going to tell you as much as we can going in a first meeting, for example. And the ones that really get it right are those ones who know that, yeah, this is going to be a multi-step process. And this first meeting needs to not be about us. We need to be focusing in on this prospect and really see what's there. And I think if you have that attitude you just mentioned, you tend to kind of gloss over and always think about, got to win this business. So I think it can be dangerous, for lack of a better word, but truly a dangerous attitude to the health of the business and the agency in that case.
Yeah, and I get why folks do it, right? Because, I mean, first of all, you want the revenue. And a lot of times if you're struggling with revenue, you think that revenue is the answer.
Yeah.
It's not good revenue is the answer, not just any revenue. Yeah. I also understand the adrenaline rush of winning new business. I mean, as someone who has won lots of contracts over the years, it's exciting. Some places you get to ring a bell and do all sorts of, fun stuff, and it's great. But you need to treat the sales process as not something where you have a singular focus on winning the business. It really needs to be about finding the right fit, because that's really what will help you grow over the long term. And it's what will produce the real results. Because if I take on business that's not a good fit, I'm either not going to make money at it, or the client is going to be unhappy with the results we produce, or worse, both. And so now you've damaged your reputation and made it harder to get out of the business. If I focus on a good fit, is it going to take a little bit longer to get to my revenue goals? Absolutely, it probably will. But it will allow you to really accelerate that growth once you're producing repeatable results for the clients you are taking on. Because you know what? They're going to say, hey, guess what? Lee was able to do all this great stuff for me. Yeah. You should go hire him. They'll help you too. So focus on that and really, instead of just trying to spray and pray, as we say in the photography world, focus on really getting the right opportunities that will advance where you want to go. And I think this leads into something else we were talking about before the show, which is organic growth. Yeah. And we're all seeing that the sales cycle is lengthening, as it typically does anytime there's economic uncertainty. This is not a new movie. Those of us who have gray hair or no hair have seen this movie many times over the course of our career. So sales cycles lengthen. And so we have two choices. We can, well, more than two, but two big things to think about. The first one is a question that I often get asked, which is, how can I accelerate this sale? How can I shorten the sales cycle? And we'll come back to that in a minute, because I think that's a dangerous philosophy.
Yeah.
And the second is, what can I do with my existing business to perhaps grow that? And would that be easier? And I know that doesn't have the same endorphin rush of adding a new client to the roster, right? I think it's one of the reasons why agencies neglect organic business growth. I think the other reason is fear, right? Because if I come to you and say, hey, Lee, I think we can do this extra work for you, and it's going to cost this, you start to worry about, well, are they going to judge the existing work? And so maybe I lose the client. Are they going to just think, well, this is not real. They just want to get more money out of me. And so let's zero in on this organic piece first. And then I do want to circle back to the accelerating the sales cycle problem as well. But so on organic growth, how do you advise agencies to think about doing it in a way that is actually productive and doesn't put the actual relationship at risk?
Yeah, it is. Well, obviously it's tough. And part of the reason we're talking about this is, I brought up just some of these conversations I have had lately with some agency owners that we're talking about exactly this, that we're seeing, whereas it was taking X amount of weeks, last 3-4 quarters, it wasn't taking that long. Things were popping. And now, man, we're really seeing a lot of feet dragging, even, ghosting us to an extent. And so, well, they're tough answers, honestly, because, and we will say that
if they were easy, we wouldn't have jobs, Lee. So
we certainly wouldn't. And I think, part of it is that you have to, especially going in the new year, right? You've got to have plans in place where, first of all, number one, you're not just relying on that organic growth, but that's not the direct answer to what you're bringing up, but that's got to be part of it. But then also, I think too often agencies also are not thinking about making themselves one of their own clients. Make your agency your number one client, and you can't, of course, you can't always do that. In fact, often you can't do that, but you can make it a priority, no matter what size firm you are, to make sure that to help with that organic growth, that you've either got your AE or AEs that are going to be as trained up as they can be, but have the tools to understand. I mean, we just had an agency the other week that was talking about the fact that, we're really finally putting into place with our own people, when we went out, and basically just kind of quizzed them informally, what's our positioning? How do you describe what we do, not only to just someone off the street, for example, but when you're working with our own clients. And minds are a little bit blown because they realize that so many of their own employees really couldn't answer it very effectively. And some of these were ones handling accounts. Now, they could certainly, not that they weren't doing a good job, but just overall thinking about making new business throughout the agency a priority, even for folks, and we've touched on this in the past, I believe, even for folks who don't touch it every day. But I think also,
but on that point, Lee, a lot of agency owners themselves can't answer that question.
That's a good point.
Right. I'm just being blunt here, but you and I take a lot of first calls with agency owners. Yeah. And so naturally part of that is, what do you do? Who do you serve?
Yeah.
And I would say it's less than 50%, and probably substantially less than 50% that can give me a truly clear and concise answer to that. And it usually ends up in some rambling version of, well, as long as someone will pay us, we could probably help anybody.
Well, and I've literally heard a version of that before. I'm like, okay. Well, and
I just saw a YouTube video with an agency owner not too long ago that essentially said exactly that in a positioning video. And I was like, okay, that's different.
Yeah. Well, can I tell you an insane story? Can I tell you an insane story, Chip?
Absolutely, Lee. That is what this show is for.
That relates to what we started talking about and moving into what we're talking about now, that a real conversation. It was in a sales call, and we're here recently, and obviously will remain unnamed if he's watching. I love you, but brought up. I was mind blown because he was talking about, hey, tell me about RSW. This is what we're doing now is not working. And early on in those conversations, I always want to ask, whether they bring it up or not, how isn't business development what have you done up till now? Why are we here in this call? And he said, we've got a person, this is the time immemorial, again, tales, but we've had this business director that we hired, has the network, but here's what he's doing. He's just basically, the network dried up. So now he's just blasting emails out, ring a bell. And he said, we have a meeting coming up with a good company who is absolutely not the right fit for us. And I don't know why we're taking this meeting. And I just had to let it sit there in silence for a second. And I'm like, why are you taking the meeting? I'm like, then what are you doing? And I'm like, why is this guy, I mean, I don't ever want, you should fire that person, but just what is he doing? He goes, well, I'm just not sure he 100% gets what we do. And I'm like, I want to reach through the screen and strangle you into, I'm like, well, then why? That's your fault then.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I mean, yes, you need to hire intelligent people that can do their own homework and sustain themselves. But oh my God, you just brought up two big, huge red flags and it doesn't mean you necessarily have to work with us, but my God, man, hear what you're saying. I want to record this and play it back to you. That's crazy. It's crazy. So
yeah. And you need to be able to very clearly say, this is what I do. This is who I do it for. And if it takes you more than 2 sentences, go back and keep working on it.
Amen.
And it should be clear enough that you can tell your Aunt Sally what it is that you do and who you do it for, and she would understand it, even if she has nothing to do with agency land.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to insult Aunt Sally. I don't actually have an Aunt Sally, so.
She's a good soul. But the 2-sentence thing, I think, is so spot on. It is so hard to do if you haven't really done it. And so I'm like, fine, whittle it down. Now we have 10 sentences. Now we've got 5. Now, and be kind to yourself. But it really is hard to get it down sometimes to that. But
it is.
I'll get sales emails constantly like, all right, how much shorter can I make this, for example, and still be effective? And it's interesting. Yeah. So
and the trick is it needs to be specific enough that, because I mean, a lot of people will boil it down to 2 sentences, but those 2 sentences are still so broad that it doesn't really help. And so what you need to do is you need to test it, and you test it by just taking a random list of companies and saying, does it match this business or not? And a person who is not familiar with your business needs to be able to say, they're likely a good fit, they're not likely a good fit based on that description that you've given.
Yeah.
And if based on your description, those things aren't falling into the right buckets, you need to go back to the drawing board and reframe how you're positioning yourself, because otherwise you're just going to continue to waste time on unproductive meetings, chasing bad leads, and being forced, in quotation marks, to just blast out to as many people as possible. If you are clear about who you are trying to reach, it becomes so much easier to use that scalpel and really reach out and say, hey, Lee, I know that we can do good work for you because we do work for these 3 businesses that you will have immediately recognized. It's not like, who are they? Here, let me Google them. Let me see what they're
right.
If your prospect has to Google the companies that you're mentioning as positive references, you're not focused enough.
Oh, that's there's your quote for this episode. It's true. And you know what we see a lot of, this has been going on for the 17 years that we've been doing this, but I can't tell you how many meetings as of this past quarter, our new business directors coming in and we're just talking about it ongoing as we do. And like, got this amazing meeting with this company I've been going after forever. The meeting got set from the first email I sent to them 9 weeks ago. It's like, so agencies, I know, be patient is like, I know you want to punch me in the face. Sorry, you can't, but you're tired of hearing that, but it is really interesting how you write a solid email like you're talking about. They're seeing it, not all of them, but you really do have to, it is multiple touches. Cause after that happened to me, bringing agencies on board, I've had this letter in my drawer for like 12 months and I'm finally getting around to it. It's like, well, like that's good. It's frustrating.
And it's timing too, because
it is,
even people who need agencies aren't necessarily looking for them right now.
Yeah.
And that might be because they're working with another agency, or it might be because there's other priorities that they have at the moment, or it might just be because they don't have enough time to focus on it.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of timing issues that come into play. And so this brings me back to what I was talking about earlier. Sales times, the time to close is lengthening. Agency owners are saying to me, and I'm sure to you as well, how can we get this to close faster? What can we do to get this unstuck?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very dangerous way to approach things, because you certainly want to be doing enough that you're making it easy for the prospect to say yes when they are ready.
Yes.
But if you were doing something like saying, well, I really need to get you on board by December 1, otherwise I'm not going to be able to get to you until, March or April.
Yeah.
Right. If you create, and there are a lot of people out there in the sales community who will advocate, creating this false urgency in order to get business to close more quickly.
Right.
Now you got two problems with that. One is if it's not true urgency,
yeah,
and they come back to you on December 10th and you say yes, well, now they've caught you in your lie.
You're right.
Well, and maybe they don't care, but that's not a good way to start a client relationship.
No.
That you said they had to sign by now or you weren't going to be able to take them.
Yeah, I don't love that.
But the second thing is, that's how you get bad fit clients. Because if I feel pressure, we're not, buying some impulse item. We're starting a relationship. And so you don't want to go in and say, you got to say yes or no by this time, because then they may come on board, but they may end up regretting it.
Yeah.
You don't really want that kind of regret, particularly early on in an agency client relationship.
Agreed.
You can't just return the agency client relationship.
Yeah, I hate that tactic. It's like a 1950s vacuum sale.
But it's incredibly common, and I see it all the time.
I do too, and it makes me bitter. You've crushed it with me as far as ever. Yeah, I hate that, and
part of it is because you should not think about business development in the agency world as sales. I mean, it is in a technical sense. But based on the ideas that most people have in their heads about what sales is all about,
yeah,
it steers you in the wrong direction. Because really, what you are is you're a matchmaker, and so think about this in terms of relationships. Would you go into a bar and say to the person you're attracted to on the next stool, "You have 3 minutes to let me know, otherwise,
right.
moving on." Look, I haven't been on the dating scene for a long, long time, but I'm pretty sure that's not a good tactic.
Yeah, probably not. No. Yeah, and that's what younger. We're certainly plenty young, Chip, but
yes. Young at heart, at least.
But coming into these roles, and if you are younger, and that you bring up such a perfect distinction about that sales, that they tend to be synonymous, and they're really not. And I think going in, if someone's starting, to have that up front, which so many don't, just to understand that's just a little piece of it, right? But just to understand, I can't talk today, that distinction would really make their life, I think that should be one of the first things they unpack, right? And I think they rarely do, it seems like.
Right. Look, this is a mistake that I made too. Early on in my agency career, what did I do? I went to the bookstore because, we still went to the bookstore back then because
I still liked it.
I'm young at heart, but not actually young. And so go to the bookstore, and what do? You go to the sales section. You start picking out sales books, and you say, okay, well, this will help give me information that I can use in order to sell more effectively.
Yep.
Yes, but. And you really need to understand the difference and the nuance in building that agency client relationship versus selling a car, selling a piece of software, selling that Black Friday TV. It's a very different thing. And if you approach it in the same way, you're going to be miserable with what you end up with.
You really are. Yeah. And you brought it back to Black Friday. Nicely done.
I did, because I did see on the clock that we are just about out of time here.
Oh. It's like you've done this before.
It is like I've done it before, but only like it because, I'm sure I'll screw something up here in the next minute or so. But this has been a very productive conversation, at least from my perspective. Hopefully other people have taken some things from it and will allow them to really target their business development efforts more effectively. And particularly as we're looking at the uncertain economic future ahead, the more precise you can be, the more of a scalpel you can use instead of that shotgun, the more likely you are, I think, to be successful.
Absolutely.
So before we wind up here, if someone is interested in learning about you, Lee, where can they find you?
Yeah, we're at rswus.com. We've got a New Year Outlook report coming out beginning of January. That should be really helpful for folks. Appreciate it as always, Chip. It's great.
Absolutely. And you guys always put out great resources. So I do encourage folks to go there. If you are interested in seeing past episodes of this show or any of the other videos that I put out, just go to small.agency.tv. And if you'd like to learn more about Saga, just go to small.agencygrowth.com to access all of our resources as well. So with that, I wish everybody here in the United States a happy Thanksgiving. As I said, we will not be back here on Black Friday, so we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. And Lee, I look forward to having you back on the show again
Yes,
soon,
me too.
because I always look forward to figuring out what kind of prop you might have for us.
Yeah,
So,
it's fun.
is that now? Will that spam be something that you serve on Thanksgiving, or will you be serving?
No, I have made spam burgers in the past, though. Salty but good.
I mean, I gotta say, spam gets a bad rap.
Yeah,
It's not bad. It's not bad.
It's
I wouldn't
not.
want to eat it every day, in part because I'd be dead. But
Yeah, we
it's
will
not bad.
wait till the next episode to announce our spam recipe book.
There we go.
It's in the works.
Excellent. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up before we go completely off the rails here. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I look forward to seeing you all back again very soon.
Ooh.